The nights are horrible. I can't sleep. I feel like my daughter is about to be here. I stand out here and wait for her.
Mrs. Legoretta is one of the many mothers who suffered the loss of a daughter due to forced disappearance. Her child was 9 years old when they sent her to the store to buy tortillas, and she never returned. Unfortunately, this woman lived her last years in anguish until her death because due to an illness she left this world without knowing the whereabouts of her little one. And the most shocking part of this case emerged when the harsh reality behind this disappearance was discovered. A human trafficking network of which it could almost be assured this young girl had been a victim.
Those people who took her away, may God speak to their hearts and return her to me because I can't take it anymore. I wish my baby were here.
Born in the municipality of Tezoyuca in the state of Mexico, Evelyn Fabiola joined the Alcantara Legoretta family on April 11, 2005. Being the youngest in the house, her two older brothers, as well as her parents Mrs. Esperanza and Mr. Salvador, always took care of and spoiled her a lot. In fact, it was a big surprise for all the members as almost 10 years had passed since the parents had decided not to seek a third child. However, when they received the news of the pregnancy, they were very happy and welcomed it with all the love in the world. And although the Alcantara Legoretta family didn't exactly have abundant financial solvency, they did have the essentials to meet their basic needs. They had a small family business that gave them what they needed to live, this being a modest bakery where Mr. Esperanza and Salvador put all their effort. For several years, they had been starting their day just before 6 in the morning to prepare everything for sale. From their home, it became customary for that delicious aroma of freshly baked bread to emanate, making this place one of the favorites of their neighbors to satisfy a sweet craving. And although the older children usually did their part to help in the store, Evelyn's attitude particularly stood out as despite her young age, she showed great interest in helping with the small details that were needed. For this young girl, her family meant everything. It was even said that she was very mature for her age, especially after, unfortunately, her mother's health began to deteriorate due to diabetes. Under this new reality, Evelyn did not hesitate to provide unconditional love, contributing and solving any inconvenience within her reach. And of course, minimizing household chores for her mother, as well as small responsibilities in the bakery, which in fact, one of the most painful things for this little girl was to see how the woman who gave her life suddenly had very bad days, from which they even had to bring her food to bed, something that, without complaint or protest, she did wholeheartedly. Evelyn Fabiola, on the other hand, held a very important place in her home. They admired her, loved her, and despite her short 9 years, they relied on her for many situations. For this reason, once tragedy struck the family, her siblings and parents suffered inconsolably.
Let them go, leave them wherever. We are not going to do anything against them. The only thing we want is our daughter.
The nightmare began on May 29th of 2014. That morning didn't seem to have anything particular. Esperanza and her husband Salvador woke up to prepare for the bread sale, as they usually did. Evelyn's brothers also helped, as they usually did, while she took care of some details according to her abilities. They worked tirelessly all morning until around 10 in the morning, when Mr. Salvador mentioned that it was time for breakfast. Esperanza was supposed to prepare the food, however. Just before she started cooking, she realized that the tortillas had run out. Given the situation, she decided to send her daughter to the nearest store to buy them. According to the tortilla shop, it was just about 500 meters away, which Evelyn usually covered on her bicycle to get there and back faster. And it wasn't a new activity for her either. In fact, among her daily activities was running some errands for her parents, like going to the store, for example. However, obviously, no one imagined that this innocent outing would mean the start of the worst nightmare.
Some time passed and I asked again what happened with Evelyn. She arrived and she didn't answer me anymore, and he left. My son peeked out and my wife was outside on the street, waiting, watching.
Over there. During the first few minutes of her absence, they thought the little one had been delayed for some unimportant reason, but as time went on, her parents and siblings decided not to delay any longer and went out to look for her. It seemed very strange to them, especially since she had gone out on her bicycle, so going and coming back should have only taken her a couple of minutes. The first place they went to was precisely the tortilla shop, which was located on Cinco de Mayo Avenue, Colonia, Ejidos de Tequistlan, in Tezoyuca, State of Mexico. "Have you seen my daughter Evelyn?" was what the distressed mother asked. "She was wearing blue pants, a pink blouse, and braids," the lady added. But unfortunately, none of the parents expected the surprising response from this woman, who was giving the first clues about Evelyn's tragic fate.
The tortilla lady told us that she indeed came for her tortillas, but she was already accompanied by a guy.
According to the testimony of the lady, the owner of the business, she thought that this man was a relative or even one of the girl's brothers, so she didn't ask any questions. Nor did she find it strange that upon leaving the store, they took the opposite direction to the young girl's house with hundreds of questions. So where is the fear in its full glory? The gentleman went out into the streets to look for the little girl, looking everywhere and shouting her name. Until, by chance, by fate, they ran into two police officers to whom they asked for help. However, despite the supposed positive response, it only took a couple of hours to show that they were not interested in the case, as they were seen at a food stand enjoying the afternoon. As if the recent disappearance of a minor did not exist, the parents had no other option but to officially report the absence of the little girl, having the strong conviction that the faster the officers acted, the more chances there were of finding her alive. It is well known that the first hours are crucial in a situation like this, but unfortunately, as in many other cases, they turned their backs on them, under the same stupid argument as always, which has condemned thousands of minors to death because the authorities do not react in time. And the response is the following: 72 hours have to pass from the disappearance to start the search. How do I tell you this? That's what they told the parents. And after hearing these instructions, they were completely petrified, knowing that waiting was not an option for them. Evelyn hadn't left of her own accord, nor was it a case of her hiding from her parents. So having that clear, they decided to ignore, obviously, the official instructions and started their own search around the area. In a matter of minutes, the news spread through the neighborhood, causing terror and outrage. Being underage, how could they wait so long? For this reason, the neighbors took the initiative to join the effort led by the main stakeholders and took to the streets with flyers, with the little girl's face, her main characteristics and contact information for anyone who knew something or had seen something suspicious. They were knocking on doors, gathering important data. They posted Evelyn's photograph on the poles. They questioned, walked dozens of blocks around, but there were no signs of her whereabouts. The more the hours passed, the more the community became enraged due to the lack of police response. In fact, they had to agree to close one of the main avenues to draw attention, demanding justice. In this way, 48 hours after the little girl was last seen alive, these useless authorities finally spoke up about it. Unfortunately, as soon as they went to the Alcantara's home, they started to give bad news. Because one of the consequences of taking so long to start the search protocol was due to the inclement weather. It had rained heavily the day before, which, according to the police, erased much of the possible traces and clues which could have been detected with the help of dogs if they had done their job on time. Now the most feasible thing was to focus on the testimonies of the people, taking as a main reference the data that the owner of the tortilla shop could provide. It was then that what she had previously told the parents was confirmed. A man in a red shirt was on a bicycle behind the little girl, who not only pretended to be another customer but also gave the impression of being a relative of Evelyn. This story was confirmed thanks to another sighting that day, this time by a woman who was crossing the area on her motorbike taxi. Similarly, she saw the little girl, accompanied by the same man, heading in the opposite direction of her home. What no one had noticed at that moment was that it was actually a deprivation of freedom. Well planned, because by recapping what had happened in previous days, and thanks to the testimony of more neighbors, they were able to locate that same man. Roaming the streets, what was he doing? Well, observing, searching, and identifying the ideal victim to easily remove from the neighborhood. Unfortunately, no one reacted in time, but the clues of what would happen were there weeks ago. The same man appeared especially during school hours, watching the little ones carefully, perhaps even choosing an easy prey. And soon this individual was identified as Emmanuel Tarios Olivar, whose record was overwhelming, giving strong signals of the possible fate that this little one had suffered. The
fact of knowing that she is his prisoner? Can you imagine my little girl when she was 9 years old and suddenly she was left all alone and...
with strangers? And it turned out that this guy had tried to do the same thing with another young girl who lived in the neighboring colony. However, failing in the attempt, he just decided to leave there, without the parents of the little girl, who, by the way, was 14 years old, pressing charges due to fear of retaliation. His arrest was not made until June 7th of the year 2014. Thanks to which they realized that he was not just any common criminal, but was part of a group of kidnappers involved in human trafficking. But he did everything possible to distance himself from this situation. However, his arrest came along with other people. These were two relatives named Yvonne Ruiz Silva and Alberto Pineda, who provided quite sinister information, because it was not a kidnapping for ransom but an illegal transaction. They would receive or received 100,000 pesos for this little girl. The other part of the deal had supposedly been carried out by a woman named Stephanie, whose whereabouts could never be discovered, except for the detail that she was in Tijuana. And thanks to this information then, the authorities were able to deduce that there was a whole network of criminals behind the case. Especially after knowing the amount requested in exchange for the little girl, which was within the ranges established according to the age and characteristics of the little girl, as if they met certain requirements to decide how much cash could be requested. Then, the Specialized Immediate Search Group, known as HEVI, set about gathering as much information as possible in an attempt to reconstruct the path Evelyn took, trying to answer the questions: who took her? Where to? How many stops did she make along the way? And with a lot of luck, where was she at this moment? And so it was that, a few days after the arrest, probable addresses began to emerge, where Evelyn was surely held captive. Allegedly, once after she was deprived of her freedom, they took her to the outskirts of Tesoyuca, very much on its limits, in a neighborhood called Santa Rosa. It was a safe house, where surely more children have suffered the same fate. It was said that she spent approximately 12 hours there in total, time that was used by these monsters to give her a radical makeover, following the steps of the protocol established by the leaders of the final criminal network. This information, allegedly provided by one of the detainees, made it very clear that they knew what they were doing, that they had enough experience to make sure that no one recognized their victims. Even when their face covered the walls of the city, that was precisely one of the most complicated things, to move the victim without drawing attention. That's why they changed their clothing, their hair, and destroyed any indication that they had been there. Perhaps they burned all their belongings, including the bicycle and their clothes, until all traces were eliminated, making it easier to move them to another place. Once they complied with the first rules of the protocol, they proceeded to take the 9-year-old girl to the outskirts of Puebla, where it was confirmed that there were at least 3 other safe houses used by the criminals to keep their victims under lock and key. And although Emmanuel Tarios Olivar had been the one who took the little girl, it was one of his relatives who had connections with at least 5 criminal groups involved in human trafficking, with Tijuana being the main city of operations. However, the investigation also revealed that people from the United States had dealings with one of Olivar's relatives. This was based on the amount of information extracted from one of their computers, from which contacts and names of cities such as Minnesota, Texas, and California could be recovered. Unfortunately for the Alcantara family, they were facing real, experienced criminals with accomplices, links, and important contacts distributed throughout the main operation points. They had taxi drivers as police spies, they gave data about their routes, checkpoints, and other information that was helpful in order to avoid justice, getting away with it practically always. And one of the things that most helped the network of criminals was that they had ex-police elements who, for unknown reasons, had ended up on the other side of the law. Which is also not strange in this country, getting easy money, giving unofficial information that is hard to acquire. And similarly, before their departure to Tijuana, their captors already knew which roads to take, which ones to avoid, where there was danger of being surprised, and where it was safer. Whatever the road taken to Tijuana, they all had something in common, as many of the victims and people involved ended up going to a key point for transactions. It was a bar called Adelita's Bar. Before the establishment was under police scrutiny, it functioned as the main operations center. Dozens of women suffered the consequences of being forced to sell their bodies, thus giving the bar owners and their partners millions in profits.
Well, they forced me to work, to have sex with the customers, and, well, to dance.
Right there. From the outside, the place only seemed to be another night spot. However, it hid extremely dark things. For example, all the logistics of human trafficking. It was also designed for a quick and effective escape in case of unexpected visits. The police obviously had hidden doors and direct passages to a hotel, as well as shortcuts for the effective transfer of victims. And with this, you realize how experienced they were in this activity. That also, according to the investigations, there was a very high possibility that Evelyn had passed through there, just like 7 other previous cases also investigated that had a lot of coincidence with each other. In addition, the authorities were able to get to information even more chilling than what I already told you, and there was a book with prices and quite detailed data regarding the victims. According to their records, an amount of $100,000 was requested for underage children for illegal adoptions, while $250,000 for teenagers who would be exploited and sent to the United States. Without a doubt, Evelyn's fate was centered on those possibilities. But no matter how many attempts were made to get Manuel Tarrios Olivar to give his exact location, they could never get anywhere. The man gave contradictory statements and never showed the slightest intention of confessing the truth.
He told many lies and contradictions. The first is that he said he never knew here. How is it not? They had a plot of land here, didn't they? The man said that because of this we won't be allowed to come here anymore.
Surprisingly and shamelessly, the defendant's parents also went to the Alcantara Legorreta family's home with the purpose of advocating for him, assuring his innocence. However, they only provided information that was used against him, as they contradicted the defendant's own account, who had previously stated that he had never been in the area. Moreover, his parents ended up confessing that they owned a piece of land near the scene of the crime. There was more than one testimony confirming his presence in the neighborhood on the day of the events and weeks prior to it. He was also caught attempting to abduct another young girl from the nearby neighborhood before Evelyn. This information and other evidence gathered by the authorities were enough for him to be given a guilty verdict, sentencing this person to 32 years and 6 months behind bars. However, despite his upcoming 3 decades in jail, he never confessed this to the father of the family. Mr. Salvador could be satisfied that the main suspect in his daughter's disappearance was sentenced, but it did him no good to see him behind bars, and yet he still wouldn't say where his daughter Evelyn was. And sadly, since then, the life of the Alcantara Legorreta family has never been the same. From being a united and hardworking family, they now only woke up to live another day in this endless nightmare. The amount of money required for an effective search ended up leaving the parents of the family in ruin. The bakery stopped opening its doors, and Evelyn's mother's health began to suffer the consequences of a lifestyle filled with stress, without rest, of sadness. While diabetes was already a big problem, it gradually consumed her to the point of plunging into a depression with no return. Mrs. Esperanza limited her existence to an incessant search. Besides, as you can imagine, she stopped smiling, stopped being interested in other things to make her pain more bearable. In fact, she only focused on going out on the street to search for and inquire about her daughter. Places like shelters, morgues, hospitals became her daily route. Because, despite everything, she held on to the hope of someday seeing Evelyn alive again. And also in April of 2016, there was a new promise from the government to resume the search for this little girl. Their words only remained as that. Promises because it was only a quick response to the protests held in front of the government palace. They wanted to silence the family by saying what they wanted to hear, but they had no intentions of allocating money for the task. The next year, new clues surfaced about his location. Someone claimed to have seen her, but even so, a quick response was carried out to find her. They only discovered a human trafficking operation linked to Tijuana, from which 5 minors were rescued, but there was no trace of Evelyn. At that time, the search was extended to American and Canadian territory because, well, as I've told you, there was evidence that the captors had made trips there. However, despite the efforts, the results were always the
same. Nothing.
It was as if they played with the feelings of the parents, giving new hopes so that in the end, everything was in vain. And finally, one day in April of the year 2018, Evelyn's mother could no longer continue with her fight. Due to a stroke, due to health complications, she left this world without knowing what really happened to her daughter. Despite his pain, Mr. Salvador vowed to his late wife to persist with the search, even if it consumes his entire life. In 2019, the authorities set out to create composite sketches of the possible appearance of the young girl who would then be 14 years old. They distributed it throughout Mexico and the United States, but unfortunately, so far it has not yielded results. And since then, the possible clues about the young girl's whereabouts have only served as false hope. Like they took her to Canada with a false identity and who knows for what purpose. Regardless of what her fate may have been, her father never stops fighting to discover it, and perhaps by a miracle of life, at some point, be able to give that hug he has longed for since her departure. Remember that on Mondays on Pepe Misterio's channel are the interviews, and there is also the secondary channel which you find as many more mysteries.